Hi, I am Dr. Clarence R. Pearson Sr., and welcome to My View, a podcast where I offer my professional perspective on today's most pressing geopolitical and socioeconomic issues. Recently, my attention has been drawn to developments in the United States, where the US President Donald Trump has announced that a peace deal has been completed. But is the war really over? Here is my view on the matter. The illusion of peace? Why a US Iran agreement may be a pause rather than a settlement. Peace agreements often arrive with the language of finality. They are announced beneath national flags, signed before cameras, and celebrated as turning points in history. Markets rally. Diplomats congratulate themselves. War weary populations embrace the hope that the worst is finally over. Yet, history suggests that the most important question is not whether a peace agreement ends a war, it is whether it resolves the reasons the war began. That question now hangs over the reported 14-point memorandum negotiated between the United States and Iran through Qatari and Pakistani mediation and expected to be formalized in Switzerland. The framework reportedly includes an immediate ceasefire, reopening of maritime trade routes, a technical process addressing Iran's nuclear program, phased sanctions relief, and the release of billions of dollars in frozen Iranian assets. For global markets and exhausted populations, the agreement offers immediate relief. For strategic planners, however, it raises a more troubling possibility that the deal may represent not the end of a conflict, but merely the beginning of its next phase. The difference between tactical success and strategic success. Modern warfare increasingly produces paradoxical outcomes. One side can dominate the battlefield while failing to achieve its political objectives. The reported conflict appears to fit that pattern. According to multiple accounts, coalition forces achieved significant military successes, including degrading portions of Iran's conventional military capabilities and imposing severe costs on the country's infrastructure and command structures. Yet military victories alone do not necessarily translate into strategic transformation. The central questions that animated the confrontation remain largely unresolved. Can Iran maintain a nuclear capability even if constrained? Will its ballistic missile program continue? Can regional proxy networks survive? Will Israel accept any arrangement that leaves unanswered questions about future nuclear breakout potential? The answers to those questions matter more than battlefield statistics. History repeatedly demonstrates that wars end when political objectives are reconciled, not merely when armies pause. The enduring power of asymmetry. One of the most significant lessons of the conflict is the continuing effectiveness of asymmetric warfare. For decades, military planners measured power through aircraft carriers, fighter aircraft, armored divisions, and conventional firepower. Recent conflicts increasingly challenge that model. Relatively inexpensive drones, cyber capabilities, precision guided missiles, maritime disruption tactics, and proxy forces have enabled weaker states and non state actors to impose disproportionate costs on more powerful adversaries. Even temporary disruptions to energy corridors can trigger global economic consequences, measured not in military losses, but in inflation, supply chain disruptions, and political instability. The conflict demonstrated that economic vulnerability remains one of the most powerful weapons in modern geopolitics. For Iran, that lesson may be more important than any military setback. The country's leadership is likely to conclude that its asymmetric toolkit remains effective enough to preserve deterrence even against technologically superior adversaries. That conclusion alone could shape strategic calculations for years. The nuclear question has not disappeared. At the heart of the agreement lies the issue that has defined US Iran relations for more than 2 decades: nuclear capability. Supporters of the memorandum argue that diplomatic engagement offers the best chance to prevent escalation while providing mechanisms for verification and monitoring. Critics counter that technical restrictions can delay a program without permanently eliminating the underlying scientific knowledge, engineering expertise, and industrial capacity that support it. This debate is hardly new. The 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, generated similar arguments. Supporters viewed it as a practical framework for reducing risk. Opponents saw it as a temporary delay that failed to resolve fundamental strategic concerns. The current agreement appears vulnerable to many of the same criticisms. Even if enrichment levels are reduced and stockpiles are addressed, knowledge cannot be dismantled. The challenge facing negotiators is therefore not simply controlling material, but sustaining confidence that future capabilities will remain constrained. That has historically proven far more difficult. Lebanon and the problem of proxy conflict. No Middle Eastern peace framework can be fully understood without examining regional proxy dynamics. For decades, Iran's influence has extended far beyond its borders through relationships with allied political and military movements across the region. These relationships provide Tehran with strategic depth while simultaneously complicating diplomatic settlements. The reported inclusion of provisions affecting Lebanon reflects that reality. Yet ceasefires involving proxy actors often prove more fragile than agreements between states. Local commanders possess their own calculations. Regional grievances persist. A single rocket attack, border incident, assassination, or intelligence operation can trigger rapid escalation. The challenge is not merely stopping violence, it is preventing thousands of independent actors from reigniting it. History offers sobering examples. The cessation of hostilities is often easier to negotiate than the mechanisms required to sustain them. Israel's security doctrine. Perhaps the most important variable lies outside the agreement itself. Israel has long maintained that it cannot delegate existential security decisions to international institutions or foreign governments. That doctrine has shaped Israeli strategy for decades. Whether confronting nuclear development, missile proliferation, or armed proxy organizations, Israeli leaders have repeatedly demonstrated a willingness to act independently when they perceive a growing threat. This reality creates a structural vulnerability within any US Iran agreement. Even if Washington and Tehran maintain compliance, the framework remains dependent upon Israel's assessment of regional risks. Should Israeli intelligence conclude that adversaries are exploiting the agreement to rebuild military capabilities, Jerusalem could determine that preemptive action is preferable to waiting. Such a scenario would place the entire framework under immediate strain. The return of gray zone conflict. The most likely outcome may not be renewed conventional warfare. It may be something more difficult to measure. Modern conflicts increasingly operate in what strategists call the gray zone between peace and war. Cyber attacks, intelligence operations, economic coercion, targeted sanctions, sabotage, disinformation campaigns, and covert actions allow states to compete aggressively while avoiding open confrontation. Such activities rarely dominate headlines in the way airstrikes or invasions do, yet they often prove more persistent. A ceasefire may stop missiles. It does not necessarily stop espionage. A diplomatic agreement may halt naval confrontations. It does not necessarily stop cyber operations. As a result, the agreement may reduce violence while leaving strategic competition largely intact. A necessary agreement, but not a final one. None of this diminishes the importance of diplomacy. The alternative to imperfect agreements is often continued bloodshed. A pause in hostilities saves lives, stabilizes markets, reduces humanitarian suffering, and creates space for further negotiations. Those outcomes matter. The danger lies in confusing stabilization with resolution. The reported memorandum appears designed to manage immediate risks rather than solve long standing disputes. It addresses symptoms more effectively than causes. The underlying drivers of tension, regional competition, nuclear ambitions, missile capabilities, proxy relationships, and competing security doctrines, remain largely unresolved. That does not make the agreement a failure. It simply means it should be judged for what it is. History may ultimately remember this memorandum not as the treaty that ended a conflict, but as the document that postponed the next phase of it. For now, the guns may fall silent. The strategic rivalry almost certainly will not. My View is a continuing series where I share informed commentary on a wide range of geopolitical and socioeconomic topics. If you found today's discussion helpful, please follow, subscribe, like, and share. Thank you for spending this time with me, and I invite you to explore other My View episodes available online. Until we meet again, goodbye.